Salam. Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm really excited to be here. It is so cold, so thank you for braving this blizzard to get here. And yeah, I'm going to just dive right in. I'm excited for the Q&A. And if I know I talk really fast, so if at any point you want to raise your hand, jump in, feel free to ask questions throughout, but we will have a designated Q&A section at the end. Today we're going to talk about the politics of fast fashion, which is really exciting because fashion is such a powerful mode of communication, and I really want us to unpack that. But first, I want to talk about my home. This is where I was born and raised. Isn't it beautiful? I was born and raised in Oklahoma. These are racists, usually identified by this beautiful flag called a Confederate flag. Usually, so you can tell who racists are with this flag. This is when Obama was coming to visit Oklahoma City for a little visit, and this was the really nice parade that came out to welcome him. And so for me, growing up in an area that was so white and conservative and racist, it was, and as someone who was visibly Muslim, that was a horrible experience for me. I was physically assaulted. I was called a terrorist every single day. I didn't realize it wasn't normal not to be called a terrorist when you go grocery shopping until I came to Chicago. So when I came to Chicago in 2012 to start university, I made my first Muslim friend. Muslims are great. You definitely make friends with us. But also, I realized that I had normalized such a level of violence for myself and my community just based on the way that people saw me and the way that I dressed. So my first interest in fashion was actually always political. I always understood fashion as a way of politically identifying yourself, whether or not you're sort of consciously doing that or not. So whether or not, for me, the hijab is a political statement, it is now in this country a political statement, whether or not we want that to be the fact. And so being able to really understand the ways in which people were thinking about me and seeing me, and therefore engaging with me, was deeply political and deeply rooted in my appearance. Because also, as we understand politics, we understand that the people who were racist toward me, these, this individual racist here, I don't know, random one, white one, sure, there's an individual racist that does individual actions of racism. But we understand that right now, it's not just an individual, the issue of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism in this country is not just an individual issue, it's a systemic issue. There are literally institutions that create and perpetuate anti-Muslim propaganda that then these people here read, hear, and then repeat. There's also people that enforce that racism. It's pointing to his butt. People that enforce that racism and the arms of the state, the enforcers of that racism. And so it's this idea that the racism that someone faces or this Islamophobia is just can be solved from all this cute interfaith work and just holding hands and kumbaya obviously can't happen because it's part of a larger industry of profit, of privilege. And all of these systems that work together in order to create someone who will call me a terrorist when I walk down the street or try to run me over with their car as a joke. And so the more that you think about fashion also, you realize that fashion also is deeply political and also involved in all of these same systems in very different ways. First and foremost, fashion is art. And all art is political, all of it. There is no such thing as apolitical art. And I'm sorry, this is Islamic school, but that's bullshit. That literally is bullshit. Because fashion, as an art form, is a powerful mode of communication. It tells a message. You're communicating something. And so with this powerful mode of communication that is able to transcend language, you're either using this power to challenge the status quo, talk about different issues, make people think differently, or you're not, and you're silent, and you're complacent. So you can sit and paint flowers all day long, but that's still political, because it's a comment of your privilege of being able to do so. So every decision that we make, even in the way that we dress, is inherently political. But if we are somebody who can step outside of our homes every single day and never once think twice about what we're wearing, that's privilege. And the majority of the people, I'm assuming, in this room don't have that privilege. Also, fashion, beyond just ability to, say, demilitarize or, have a slogan on our shirt like art does, fashion is also deeply and inherently political because of how intimate it is to our bodies. There is nothing else that literally rubs off on our skin as much as fashion does. It literally is touching and enwrapping who we are, like our physical manifestations of ourselves. And so as many of us, I'm assuming, are Muslims in this room, we think about halal food, right? We think about what goes in our bodies because we're taking care of our bodies, and we treat our bodies in a very pristine way. But what does that mean if we don't think about where the clothes come from that is rubbing on our bodies? What does that say on a spiritual level if our hijabs are made in a sweatshop by Muslim women? Like, what does that mean? And what does that mean even if we're not religious, that something that has been made in a product of violence is constantly rubbing off on our skin? On a spiritual level or a metaphysical level, like what is that really, how is that affecting our bodies and our psyches? So on a very internal level, like nothing else touches our skin more than clothes does. Every single day, and most nights, we are touching clothes. And so we have to think about how intimate that this experience is and how disconnected we are from something that's so intimate. Also, externally, like we literally frame our bodies with clothes. Every time we step out of the house, we have framed ourselves for public consumption. And this is also something that a lot of us in this room, by virtue of being people of color, by virtue of being hijabi, have to also think about. The ways in which we're choosing to show or uncover, cover parts of our bodies, this says something about who we are on so many different levels. Or it doesn't. Or the fact of the matter of the ways in which it also shows gender, for example. Trans people, so people who also may appear to cross-dress. So for example, if you appear masculine, but you're wearing a dress, you're at a higher risk of being physically assaulted by the police or by people. And so the fact that we also express gender on clothing is also that's so intimate to who we are. So yeah, are our clothes halal? Question, think about that. Also, beyond just the physicality of fashion, fashion has historically been used deeply in political ways. So one of the reasons the United States gave to invade Afghanistan to save the brown women from the angry brown man, because what? They weren't wearing miniskirts, so they weren't free, obviously. And so miniskirts and hijabs literally being used as an excuse for military occupation. Photos of women in Afghanistan wearing miniskirts were actually shown to Trump, our dear leader, last February. Last February. And based on those photos, and like oil and resources, he agreed to keep troops on the ground. Because Afghan women were once free and could like somehow become free again if America could get them to wear miniskirts. And so clothes are always sort of, especially when it comes to women's bodies, are really seen as, on a political lens, as what oppression or freedom could look like. Literally limiting and reducing our whole identities and everything, and our even expressions of liberation into just a miniskirt or a hijab. Also, obviously, violence, surveillance. If you wear a hijab, you have a higher risk of being stopped by the TSA. A program called the Countering Violent Extremism, so CVE, which Illinois actually had a $185,000 grant awarded to, uses hijab as a conveyor belt for radicalization. So growing a beard for men, wearing a kufi, dressing Muslim, makes you, in the eyes of the state, a greater threat to quote-unquote national security, which of course is a bullshit term. But also, production and consumption, which is what we're going to focus on today. Where our clothes are made and who uses that clothes is so deeply political. Does anybody know where their clothes are made? Okay, well, that's because you make your own clothes. That does not count. Anybody else? How is it that nobody here knows the hands that went into, like, literally what's touching you right now? How is that not a question that we ask? And that's something that is strategic. There's a reason why we're not even thinking about those people. There's a reason why we don't think that that's strange, that like literally hands have intimately touched and like caressed this clothes, and now you're wearing it. And that relationship is so severed, but there's a reason why all of that exists. So, and also my favorite thing about fashion and why it's political is that literally everyone's wearing clothes. Alhamdulillah, it's also cold, so we have to. But everyone wears clothes. Maybe not everyone's a painter, but everyone wears clothes, which means that everyone is complicit in the ways in which fashion is political. Every decision that we make is a political decision. And every time we put something on, or every time we're thinking about the ways in which we're dressing, or our complicity, which we'll talk about on a greater level, we benefit at the end of the day for that $5 shirt. Like, it is for us. And so, yeah, the fashion industry is also an industry, a very, very violent one. You can come in. I'm going to make a big deal about you now, like being at the door. Fashion industry is like a huge industry, one in which 1 in 6 people on the planet work in the fashion industry. That is a lot of people. I'm trying to censor myself. That is a lot of people, 1 in 6 people on the planet. Most of them, I don't know why this is not loaded. Okay, can you see that? Okay, well, this part says, and only 2% receive a living wage. Sad that the most impactful part of this is not covered. Only 2% of 1 in 6 people that work in the fashion industry receive a living wage. But I also should mention that a living wage also doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, because a living wage is also set by governments and isn't always actually a living wage. So I would actually argue that people who are able to survive on this money that they're getting off of the fashion industry, I would say is maybe less than 1%. So people who are actually designers, people who are profiting, people who own Zara, H&M, those are the 0.0001% of the fashion industry who have that money.
I think our projector's being political.
It's censorship. This is strategic censorship. It's okay. We will speak regardless. And speaking of this industry, thinking about every single way that a shirt like this is produced. So simple polo, Hilo polo, it's ugly actually, but thinking about how a shirt like this is made. We have to think about the raw materials. So there's literally people who have extensive farmland, and there are people who work on those farms. They're either harvesting cotton, they are, harvesting other raw materials that are required to then create fabric. You also need pesticide, you need a lot of water, and you need farmland. So actually a lot of farmland is in the Philippines and Indonesia, and the government actually works with the military to seize a lot of that land and kick indigenous people off of that land and then collect it for investors looking to build farmland. So you need all of the raw materials. You then also need workers to harvest the raw materials. Then you need to process those raw materials. So you need water. Again, 400 gallons for just one cotton t-shirt is needed to harvest or to process. 1,800 gallons for a pair of jeans. So one pair of jeans requires 1,800 gallons just to process the materials to go into those pair of jeans. You need energy, obviously, electricity, dyes, chemicals, a lot of that. This is the background. You can't really see it's purple. But everywhere close to factories that are actually producing raw materials that use dyes and chemicals have completely destroyed local water sources. Then you also need people to transport everything from the raw materials to the factory. And then at the factory, you have people who work at the factory, the laborers, and about, on average, 2% of every contract that goes to a factory actually goes to labor. So 98% goes to management and overhead. You also need maintenance. Then you also need transportation from then the production house to then usually sorting to finishing, and then usually it goes into the stores. You also need people to man the stores. And after all of that, then the company has a 60% markup. This is standard industry rate. So if you take 60% and you're selling a shirt for $14, that means every single person that has earned a living up until this point, $5.67. That's impossible to ever get to a number that you see in your stores without not just laborers, but every single aspect of this chain of intense exploitation and violence. And particularly fast fashion production is the most violent way to produce clothes. It is a model of fashion production, and it relies on basically the Forever 21, Zara, Gap, all of these that have 5 million new styles today, those are fast fashion. The ones that have constantly new seasons coming out, constantly new styles, they take things that they see on the runway at New York Fashion Week, they sort of quickly copy them and have 10 different styles from each look, and they put them out in the stores. But the main thing there is that you have to create desire. You have to create this constant need of something new, these trends. And those are all intentional. So before, about a few decades ago, there was only 4 seasons, as there are 4 seasons. Now, in the fashion production of fast fashion, there's actually 52 seasons in the fashion industry. There are also 52 weeks in a year. So that literally means there's one new season every single week for fast fashion production. So there's pre-fall, extra. That literally are the names of all of these collections that you see constantly. Is because they literally made up seasons. And so you need to constantly have the new thing. And center to fast fashion production is QRM, which is quick response manufacturing. So not to be super technical, but this basically is the requirement. This is the model in fast fashion production, and it centers time as the central and highest priority. You want to get things quickly from the runway to mass production onto people's backs. And so because of this time, not quality, and in fact, a lot of clothes are actually made to fall apart. So construction in fast fashion factories are created in a way that it will fall apart after a few washes, so you have to buy something new. So again, that creation of desire. And then when time is so central to every part of the supply chain, this actually creates an environment that requires violence in order to function. And so we also see this in data and facts. So anytime management comes and meets with the buyers or the brands that are producing at these factories, we always see that violence is spiking because the demands placed on that factory are impossible. And so violence always spikes in factories whenever they just come out of brand meetings.
Could you explain that?
Yes.
What kind of violence?
Okay, we'll talk. Well, actually, we have a slide about all the violence. Yes. Lots of violence. So this is an example based on a report that came out by the Global Labor Justice earlier last year. In Bangladesh, a worker must produce 1 or more items per minute. This is a quota. In Cambodia, you have to do 200 difficult pieces or only 500 easy pieces in an hour. And as someone who is now working in the fast fashion industry, this is not fast fashion, in the fashion industry, this is actually this does not happen. And you can tell that this is never human. No matter how good you are, this is impossible. But these are actual quotas. So what does that mean? That means that when you have these impossible rates that you cannot meet, you then can insert violence to make people work beyond human capacity. So based on the reports that have come out from Gap, H&M, and Walmart factories, particularly Indonesia, Southeast Asia, these are the most common forms of violence that have been reported by garment workers across the board. So threats of rape and assault are very, very common. Oftentimes, sexual assault is pretty normal within fast fashion industries. Collapse from exhaustion. So actually, particularly during Ramadan in Indonesia, there's reports of mass collapse from fainting because of working conditions are just so much and people are fasting. And they'll just collapse because it's hot and there's no AC. So there's mass collapse every Ramadan during Indonesia, or in Indonesia. Obviously, pregnant women are fired. Gender-based violence, so violence particularly targeting women. Retaliations for speaking up and organizing for rights. Also at the press level, so any local press that documents any of this will also get retaliated against by huge factories. There's union busting, which is huge. Systemic silencing. So this also happens here in the United States. For example, I was working on a piece for Teen Vogue, and they agreed to publish the piece, but then after they read the interviews with garment workers in H&M factories and they saw how damning these interviews were, for legal reasons they weren't allowed to publish the piece. Which means that it went through their legal department and they offered to pay a kill fee for this piece, so it would never see the light of day, because they have contracts with H&M for advertising. And so they can't publish actually garment worker voices on their publication. So this silencing also happens here, which is, again, the reason why no one knew at the beginning where their clothes came from is because you're not allowed to know. People are paying a lot of money to make sure you don't know who made your clothes, and why that's not even a question that a lot of people think about. And of course, regular and overpaid overtime, unpaid overtime. And oftentimes, there's a lot of stories of women who I even interviewed that they haven't seen their children in so long because they're always at work. And by the time they go to school, they're up before them and already at work. And by the time they come home, they're fast asleep in bed, and they don't get weekends. So it also just creates so much internal struggle for families and parents especially. And this is a quote from a garment worker in India, in an H&M factory. And kind of an example that highlights some of the violence that we just discussed. So she says that my batch supervisor came up behind me as I was working on the sewing machine yelling, "You are not meeting your target production." He pulled me out of the chair and I fell on the floor. He hit me, including on my breasts. He pulled me up and then pushed me to the floor again and kicked me. Sorry, I got thirsty. Also helpful for dramatic pause. Yeah, this is not abnormal. And this is really, really regular and really well documented. So exploitation and abuse is not inevitable in the fashion industry. It actually is required. Like it needs to happen in order for the fast fashion industry to be able to exist based on this model, as we just discussed. Which then leads us to think about what can we do and what can we not do, right? So we have this huge issue, and that violence is required within the way that the majority of our clothes are produced. But then we see things like Zara's like Choose Life campaign and like, oh my God, recycled, recycling, upcycling. All of the cycling is happening at Zara. And so, we get really excited. We're like, oh my God, everything's great, it's ethical. H&M has a conscious collection, so they say that all of their pieces are sustainably made. But what does this mean in the context of this? So this garment worker in an H&M factory was working in H&M's sustainable factory. Sustainability does not mean ethical. But sustainable can be sustainable fabrics that could be made with organic cotton. But organic cotton has been documented to be picked by child slaves across northern Africa as well. So organic doesn't necessarily mean that it's ethical. Of course, we're in a capitalistic world and nothing's ethical. But that being said, still, a lot of these campaigns is what we call greenwashing, which is basically a brand wanting to push themselves as like this forward, progressive brand that's like doing all this like green stuff, and like they're great. And oh my God, we need to go support H&M, and it's working. But greenwashing then allows them to wash themselves of all of the other violence that they're doing. So it allows them to make them seem like they're ethical and green when really they're a violent, horrible corporation that is donating to save Notre Dame when their own garment workers are dying. And it allows people to like have this idea and this branded image of H&M and Zara and all of these other fast fashion brands. But also, when you have one sustainable collection, what does that say about the rest of your pieces automatically? Which is like common sense. So ethical fast fashion is fake news. There's no such thing as ethical fast fashion. That cannot exist. But also, sustainable fast fashion is fake news. Because then, again, the number of pieces that are required in order to do fast fashion, it's not sustainable. You can have sustainably made pieces, but fast fashion is not sustainable. So these are all fun buzzwords. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of is representation. Oh my God, Nike. Nike sees Muslim women. MashaAllah, look at that pro-hijab. So Nike is coming out and being like, oh my God, we love Muslims. Like, look at us. We're supporting them. We're even making a hijab for you guys. Like, how cute it is. It's really ugly. And we love it. Like, Muslims literally love Nike. Muslims are constantly trying to work with Nike. I have my email inbox full of Nike being like, oh my God, work with us. We love you. So we also have Nike supporting Kaepernick, who we all love. And now Nike is really such a progressive organization, standing at the forefront and getting to decide what like good politics looks like, and standing and supporting Kaepernick when everyone was like not supporting him. So literally, such champions. Why is this so and now people like find it funny. I'm glad that like now it's obvious in the context of what we're talking about, but this is really a really horrible time because people eat this up. So according to the Business of Fashion just last month, there's this huge scandals like of sexual assault within Nike, different campaigns that were happening, and quote, whether consumers care is debatable. Nike's sales clearly haven't been hurt by discrimination allegations, and the brand is more likely to be lauded for its progressive values these days in the wake of its wildly successful campaign with ex-NFL star and activist Colin Kaepernick. There's a reason why a lot of people here probably haven't even heard that Nike has been in scandals with sexual assault. It's because no one wants to share that, because they're your problematic fave. Say hi, Kia, your problematic fave. You love them because they are the face of, and Colin Kaepernick is the face of them. They're having all these POC, radical, hijab-wearing, Muslim-looking people who are producing or in front of all of their clothes. And so they also have their own type of washing. I like to call this revolution washing. So it's like greenwashing, but it's for the revolution. And so a lot of these brands right now are sort of wanting to have these progressive values. These huge trillion-dollar corporations are trying to define for us what progress and progressive values could look like. But again, representation cannot be a replacement for liberation. And that's super important because at the end of the day, who is making this clothes? Muslim women in hijabs in sweatshops. So fashion that also maintains systems of global and economic inequality but makes you like feel good or like makes you feel seen and represented is also deeply, deeply problematic. So what's happening right now is actually really terrifying because a lot of young people especially are really eating this all up, and they love all of this, and they're really allowing themselves to be persuaded by all of these really, really amazing and persuasive ad campaigns and endorsements, but that's what they're doing right now because they know they can't survive without it. And so what is the answer? Abolition. Anyone heard of abolition before? Cool. Okay. So basically, abolition is an understanding or like a political alignment in a way that understands that there are systems that require violence and that can't be reformed and therefore must be abolished. So slavery, a lot of the abolition movement in the United States was really hyped up around the anti-slavery movement, and that's where it sort of really got popularized, in which you can't reform slavery, right? You can tell like a slave owner to be a little bit nicer, but like that's a reform. At the end of the day, slavery cannot exist, period. So we have to abolish the institution of slavery. Other institutions that have come from that, sort of like prisons, policing, militarism, all of these are also related and are right now current campaigns for abolition in Chicago as well. So prisons, for example, require violence and actually don't have a positive outcome on society. And we can talk about that too if we want in the Q&A. And so prisons right now need to be abolished. Like they do not contribute anything to society. They need to be abolished, just like we saw fast fashion requires violence. You can't reform it. We looked at all the reform attempts. You can't reform fast fashion, so we have to get rid of it. And there's also a reason why I think it's really important to understand where the roots of fast fashion, the roots of abolition come in like this prison and slavery industry, because fast fashion is also connected to the prison and policing industry. So a lot of our clothes, Nike included, are actually produced in prisons in the United States. So slavery actually isn't abolished. It's happening inside jails. And there's somehow a debate of whether or not it's ethical. It's not. That's not even the point of this screenshot. Such a silly question. But some of the things that are produced by garment workers or slaves in US prisons are military gear, law enforcement equipment, McDonald's uniforms, McDonald's, honestly. A lot of clothes, a lot of jeans are actually produced in prisons in the United States. But not just the United States prisons. This report came out last month, but I'm working with an organization right now that is about to release a report confirming the likeliness of this, that actually Nike, that the raw materials that are needed, so we talked about the raw materials that need furniture, those are actually right now being processed by Uyghur Muslims in internment camps.
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yes. So the materials needed for Nike, so the cotton, usually Nike collegiate apparel, so like Nike clothes, are right now being harvested and picked and processed by Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in China. So for those of you who don't know, there are right now over 1 million Uyghur Muslims, which is an ethnic minority in Western China, who are in concentration camps and internment camps. So they're sort of being brainwashed. There's like government brainwashing trying to get them to like not be Muslim anymore. They're forced to eat pork. A lot of sterilization is happening, organ harvesting, and they're also making your clothes. Also, which is kind of, it's not funny, it's deeply linked to American militarism. So the fact that the United States went and invaded Afghanistan under the guise of like hijabs and miniskirts, interestingly enough, Kabul has actually become a major manufacturer now of US military uniforms. So the US military will bomb the shit out of Afghanistan, and then, now that people are unemployed and there's nowhere to get work, you have a huge amount of people that need jobs, and you're allowed to give them sweatshops now to produce American military uniforms. Does that not like blow your mind? That blew my mind the first time I read this. And now America is pulling out, and so now all these people who had sweatshop jobs are even losing their sweatshop jobs because there are other cheaper places to produce US military uniforms. So it's very complicated and very horrible because it's a race to the bottom. And the fast fashion industry is so deeply connected to militarism, so deeply connected to prisons and police and capitalism and the environment. The second biggest polluter and destructor of the environment is the fast fashion industry. Surprise. So that's sort of the situation that we're in right now. We are in a major crisis that is so deeply intertwined with so many things that we're seeing around the world right now. One, not actual answer to all of this, but an attempt at sort of thinking through what an abolitionist perspective to the fast fashion industry looks like, because abolition is just as much getting rid of an institution as it is creating the vision of what you want to see in that world. So what does the world look like without fast fashion? What could that world look like without prisons? What could a world look like with a defunded US military? And all of these are very related questions in my mind. And so for us, what we've done, the AIC has wonderfully been our home for, so thank you so much. AIC is home to Blueton Production, which has launched January of 2019 of this year. We are an all-women, immigrant and refugee-run workers' cooperative production house. So we are like the sweatshop, but without the violence. This is really difficult because, again, people don't actually know that their clothes are still made by humans. And so for us, it's really important that we're able to think about what a world could look like. How can we produce clothes? Because inevitably, we need clothes. People need to wear clothing. We are pro-clothes. But how can we create clothes? What would a world look like in which the clothes that we produce actually could be something that we're proud of wearing, actually could be healthy for us? Could be something that, like, and this might be like a weird thing that I think about, but like sometimes I think about if the Prophet was here right now, would he be wearing something made from a sweatshop? Of course not, especially given that Muslims are the ones making it. So like what could clothes look like that could literally make people feel good about wearing? And so for us, this means that it's worker owned, which means that the people making the clothes get to own the business, get to decide who we work with, how everything is run, and what the space looks like. And also we get to set everything together. So our wages are all internally set based on a thriving wage that we've set together. So what does it mean to not just expect of, like, getting by, a minimum wage, or even a living wage in Chicago, $15 an hour is not enough if you're a widow and have 4 children under the age of 18. That's not enough. So what does it mean if we're not trying to survive but literally thrive and grow and create something for ourselves in this world? So we've set that as our basis, and we're able to work with brands on a global scale, but we're not even that much more expensive than an average factory. Because our contracts, while 2%, as we mentioned, goes through labor, for the majority of contracts, 80% of our contracts goes directly to labor. Because we don't have to pay for a lot of things. We've had a community space that allows us to prioritize humans and not capitalism or the time or the speed. So for us, we're trying to address systemically what an alternative to the fast fashion industry could look like on a production level, but also what does it mean to create a workplace that centers humans and not speed? So what is a non-capitalistic understanding of what a workplace could look like, and that people also on an intersectional level, the women, again, who are making this clothes have historically been always people who look like us. They're always the immigrants and refugees. They're always the black women on the south side. It's always the immigrants who come in with their little blue tint. Oh yeah, is our namesake, blue tint. It's always the people who you will go to this as a child and like expect cookies, and you see sewing kit. Our people have been doing this work for decades and centuries. And so it's being able to like take these skills that are already existing in our communities and being able to get paid actual money and wages for it beyond something that like we've so devalued in our also devaluation of women in this patriarchal world. So that's all I got. And I want to end with just this beautiful quote about abolition, in my opinion. And so she writes that the goal of oppressors is to limit your imagination about what is possible without them. So you might never imagine more for yourself and the world you live in. Imagine something better. Get curious about what it actually takes to make it happen. Then fight for it every day. Thank you so much.
So I just have a question about the cost of purchasing these types of clothes. I mean, it can at times be prohibitive, even though people would like clothes that are made in a good factory with everyone getting a good wage. Many people could not afford the cost of those clothes. So I'm just wondering how you resolve that issue.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because this question is very common. It's something that it's really important to talk about, a perceived inaccessibility of ethical fashion. And typically where this takes us if we go down this rabbit hole, it pits poor Americans or just people who aren't rich people in America against poor garment workers in Indonesia. But that's not the fight. The fight is, why is Zara, the owner of Zara, owner of Intertex, one of the richest people on earth? That should be the conversation. It's why aren't the people who are actually profiting the most from that entire supply chain not taking 1% off, 1% off of their salaries, and then everyone would be able to get a living or thriving wage. And that's never the conversation. We always want to direct it at sort of the people on the same level and like sort of like pitting poor people against poor people. But that is really difficult, you know, because that's not the way that we should be thinking about this if we're thinking about this structurally. Because ultimately, I think also we do need to be thinking, we need to have a radically transformative relationship with our clothes too. So unfortunately, right now, we look at clothes as something that's just like cheap, on sale, we don't give thought to it, but fashion is art, as we discussed. And we need to be thinking about our clothes also in a less capitalistic but more mindful way. So if we think about our wardrobes like an art gallery, like we maybe have like fewer pieces, and we think about each piece so strategically. And each piece says something about us. We're not going to fill a wall with paintings in every corner, but we pick a few pieces that say a lot to us and we invest in them. And just like we appreciate each brushstroke on this painting, we also should appreciate each thread that went into weaving the clothes that we're wearing. And I think that if we're able to think about clothes as something that's so much more artistic, that allows us to also redefine our relationship with it, but also bring value into the labor that's historically been women's work. Women dominate the fashion industry in terms of production and consumption. And so what does that mean to be able to understand that our clothes should cost more because the hands that went into it are valuable? And so I think being able to understand clothes as something that should be an investment for us, I think also allows us, is like a feminist perspective in a way. But I think also think about all the other things we invest in our life, right? So we're comfortable spending so much money on cars, on rent, and all these things. But again, clothes are so intimate to our bodies. Like this is like a very personal experience. So I think in the short term, I think it's really thinking about purchasing less and purchasing in items that won't fall apart. So not buying fast fashion. So maybe instead of buying 100 shirts, you buy 10 in a year, and then each of those shirts will last you so much longer. Because if we also think about it, like my mother had so many things to pass down to me. I have nothing. If I ever have a kid, I will have nothing because everything's fast fashion and it's made to fall apart. So our generation doesn't even have anything to pass down because the clothes were not made to last past our own lifetimes. So thinking about, again, like a clothing as something that's more sort of intimate and intense than just something on sale because you buy it because it's like, oh my God. Yeah.
I was going to ask, like, what are your thoughts on like the ethics and the sustainability of like secondhand shopping and thrift store shopping, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good alternative for a lot of people who may not be able to just like shop at really expensive ethical stores all the time. But I also think that there is a politics around there's a politics around thrift shopping, especially when upper class or upper middle class white women will go into like poor areas where there are thrift stores, and when the managers see continuously a different demographic coming in, those prices will get raised, and then the people who actually need thrift stores in order to actually purchase clothes won't be able to afford that anymore. So there's actually a lot of gentrification that happens around thrift stores, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. A lot of people also think about thrift stores as like a garbage can for themselves whenever they're like, oh, I'm just going to like donate this anyway, or like they'll feel like they can donate their entire wardrobe as an excuse to buy a new one. But thrift stores actually discard the majority of the clothes that come in, but not just to landfills, but actually to South Africa. And so people in South Africa are wearing the clothes that no one here will ever buy, and it floods the market there. So local designers in South Africa, their industry is completely destroyed because no one is buying their like unique handmade pieces because you can buy a shirt that says "Kiss Me, I'm Irish," you know. So it's also devastating to like economies globally, but particularly in South Africa. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, are there any good guys in mainstream?
You.
But I'm not a mainstream fashion guy, right? So and also, how do we responsibly? I don't think I need a mic. How do we responsibly donate our clothes? Obviously, it starts, as you said, buy less, buy quality. But we're already drowning in our clothes. I know you know that Americans have a lot of clothes in their closets. How do we responsibly get rid of them? And are there any good guys who produce, somewhat mainstream clothing.
And what do you mean by mainstream?
Like
Street fashion.
garments, right? Like t-shirts and jeans and
Like any good
like
brand
everyday
ever
wear,
to
right?
exist.
So yeah, like I do custom clothing, but that's mostly very specified.
So like non-custom brands.
Yeah. Are there
Okay,
any good
so-
are there any good brands?
Kind of. So to preface, there is no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism, as we all know. So ultimately, everything that we purchase, not just clothes, our phones, everything that we buy, ultimately comes from systems of injustice that are required in order for us to like feel like we're having great deals. So quick answer,
From my iPhone.
yes, burn it. If it's iPhone 11 though, I kind of need that because I've been told many times that I have a bad camera.
Organic kale.
Yeah, like organic, even like food is like really destructive to the environment, destructive to like farmers. So there's like buzzwords that we just like to eat up rather than the organic kale. But I think that it's less important, and I think that the conversation that I don't want this to delve into is like where should I shop, like what brand should I buy from? Because ultimately, and I kind of hope this came out a little bit, is that it's not an individual thing, it's a system. And so it's not about everyone in this room stopping to purchase from fast fashion. It's how can we collectively organize against fast fashion? And that doesn't even look like maybe protesting on the street, being like, oh yeah, let garment workers unionize. Maybe that's protesting the military. Maybe that's protesting the police. Maybe it's shutting down prisons. And by understanding how related and connected fast fashion is to every single institution that is violent, it allows us to be able to advocate for garment workers in the work that we're doing on a myriad of levels. So we don't need to necessarily be like focused on maybe like targeting Nike stores and like burning shit down, which I will not condemn. But it's more about thinking about on a systemic level, what does it mean to challenge fast fashion, and how can we be a part of a larger movement against that, rather than like how can I buy the revolution? There are some brands here and there that are great, but I don't like to name them because I don't like to promote. Like we can talk afterward, but like that's not. I'm paid, so I'm not going to endorse them. No, I'm kidding.
Get rid of the stuff that we already hoarding responsibly.
Well, I think that there's many places that you can donate to. It's not that every piece that you donate to like a thrift store is going to like destroy some economy somewhere. A lot of times you can there are many creative ways if you want to have like a clothes swap with people, if you want to repurpose things, passing things on, sort of gifting things. Like I think there's a lot of ways that we can creatively make use of our clothes instead of from just throwing it away or even donating. But we can donate right too. You know, like there's different places that actually are like requesting winter coats. So.
Given the fact that the Blue Tin Productions couldn't also be producing its own raw materials, how do you know that your raw material streams aren't feeding the same vile?
They are. And that's something that we need to be transparent about. Because, well, ultimately, we aren't choosing what fabrics we work with. So since we're just doing production, the designer will come in with the design, and they'll send the fabric to our studio. So we actually had a meeting today with someone who is really amazing, and the contract hasn't been signed, so I can't announce their name. But they have ethically sourced every single thing. Everything's been hand-dyed from the United States, from like specific farmland in Texas, like something in Colorado. And so everything has been a year and a half in the making of really coming up with a brand that every piece, even the elastic, has organic cotton in it. That can trace down to like the exact farmer working in the United States. And so it's possible, but I don't think people are willing to take that time and effort into actually supporting those sort of ecosystems of ethics and ecosystems of like people who are trying their best to like do the right thing in this industry. So yeah, and we're really excited because we're going to be working with them pretty soon, so it's going to be great. But there are some people obviously who decide to prioritize labor in the production rather than tracing back their fabric. So tracing fabric is actually one of the most difficult things to do because of the layers of people that you like, that the chain of fabric production is so convoluted and so opaque. Wait, is opaque the one that's clear or the other one? You guys know what I mean. The one that's very dark. It's very dark and muddy. And so fashion and fabric production, it's very difficult to trace back. Nearly impossible. And of course, there's a reason for that. Just like there's systemic silencing of garment workers, there's even more layers and complications to how our fabric is made because of how rooted it is to land and agriculture, and that's always rooted to the military. So it's such an intense, difficult process that even if you wanted to, you'd have to do a year and a half of research to figure out where to get fabric from.
And in terms of because I was going to ask, you half answered my question speaking about this unnamed
Opaque?
person that you're or a company that you're contracting with. But I was wondering how you market your clothing. I mean, big companies have a super edge over you because they can supply in volumes that you couldn't possibly do from that little room.
Nor would we ever want to.
No,
We have a room. Thank you
want
for the
room.
Yeah. So like, how are we able to stay competitive? That's a very interesting question. So ultimately, we're also a B2B business, which means we're a business to business, which means that we're not actually selling anything to consumers because we're just manufacturing for designers. And so designers will come to us, and then we'll produce for them, and then it'll get shipped back to the designer, and then they'll sell it. So that's helpful in that we don't have to have our own marketing campaigns for consumers. But we're also trying to change that because we want to push a new level of transparency in garment production that allows people to not know that things are like made in the USA, but made at Blue Tin Production by a cooperative of like refugee immigrant women. And that's important to us because we want people to even have that like, oh wow, yeah, like people produce my clothes when they see like the care label. And I think that that's really important, and that's sort of part of our consumer like people advocacy aspect is like really being able to destroy all of those barriers that we have between people and the people that make their clothes. So we also take documentation whenever we're working with designers, and we like show the hands that go into intimately creating a piece of clothes. So they post on their Instagram. People are really excited and to learn about that, how their clothes are made. And also something that I think we are, maybe thanks for better or for worse, right now a time where people are thinking about sustainability and ethics. Of course, the Revolution washers of the world are doing a really good job, but we're also able to challenge that and like showing truly how transparent we are. So we are working with a few professors who are going to be doing case studies about Blue Tin to be able to take on an international level. And after we release our financials, which we are more than excited to do, as well as some of the designers that we've worked with, being able to show the actual numbers and data behind the possibility of being able to have worker-run cooperatives as a model for fashion production on a global scale. So I was in Indonesia a few months ago and meeting with garment workers there, and even talking with them about the possibilities of worker-owned cooperatives. And that's something that they had tried out once before, but because they had no individual relationships to brands, they weren't able to be successful. But that's easy for like our end, right? Like the brands are right here. The brands are all around us. So it's something that we're really excited about, the possibilities of having a truly radical and transformative company or co-op that we're hoping to sort of expand on a global scale. And they're making a TV show about us. Maybe, we'll see. That was secret.
Just one more follow-up question.
Yes.
The regular, what do you call it, fast fashion
Yes.
industry is based on exploitation and almost superhuman quotas expected from the garment workers. Do you pay your workers per hour, regardless of how effective they are in producing?
You're getting into the technical questions. I love it.
The management question is.
Yeah. So one reason, just to quickly contextualize this comment also, the quotas that we saw that were like very impossible, a lot of people are actually speculating that they're preparing rates for eventual transition into robots. So the idea is that eventually all of the garment workers will be replaced by robots to make all of the clothes. So that's also a part of the reason why these numbers are humanly impossible, because they're robot possible. And so in the meantime, humans will be pushed to be as robot as possible in order to produce those clothes. And so, but also I want to push back on some of the framing of that, because they're not my workers, it's a workers' cooperative, so we are co-members. And we have collectively decided the ways in which payment works for all of the members that make sense, but also for our own co-op long-term like health. So currently, right now, everyone's being paid hourly. And that's the way, because we were still in our pilot phase. So we're only here 3 days a week. And we want to make sure that we are sort of growing together and being able to really build not only relationships with our designers, but relationships with each other. Because ultimately, we see each other like family, for better or for worse. We had a big fight today, and we were yelling at each other. But then we also, we hugged at the end of the day. And tomorrow, we'll probably come back and, we kiss each other every day when we, see each other hello and goodbye. And so I think what we're trying to build is a community and less employees. And that also understanding is that we know that this is a project that we're not just doing in order to get money and walk away, but in order to actually build something that could be replicable in other places. So even on the very, very first day of our very first meeting, before we even learned each other's names, I asked everybody, I was like, okay, what are your visions for this space? And one member, Mercy, she literally was like, I want to go international, day one. And she's like, I want to be able to expand and envelope as many women as possible into the folds of this organization. And I think because that's the vision and less a get-rich-quick scheme, I think that allows people to also be more flexible with that. So for example, if there's been several days where we just need one more extra hour in the day to finish a production, and everyone's willing to not get paid for just 1 hour to finish the production because we won't be able to finish without it. And so it's sort of like a family in which sometimes we have to make sacrifices, but we know that we're doing this for something that's bigger for ourselves, bigger than ourselves. And it's not always easy because ultimately a lot of the members are in really horrible financial situations. And so we can't always have the privilege of deciding what happens. But fingers crossed, if we are able to launch next year, 2020, full-time, which is our goal, we're actually moving into a salaried sort of relationship because we also, I think ultimately, hourly pay can be oppressive as well. So what does it mean to have a guaranteed payment that you're going to be getting every single 2 weeks or whatever? And also, everything that sort of, comes with what that looks like. So the way in which we want to be modeled in 2020, if we are full-time, is to have a guaranteed salary for every member. And then quarterly, because we're a workers' cooperative that share profits, if we finish early or we get extra, so we kind of go above and beyond, then all of the profit that we get, we can divide equally amongst the members. So there's incentive to obviously do better and get more clients and work faster because you have a monetary bonus waiting for you at each quarter. And also, when we fail together. So we'll yell at each other. So that's also incentive to not mess up. I'm kind of kidding. You had your hand raised for a minute.
Yes, personally, I really enjoyed what you're speaking, and I'm a big fan of sustainable technology and everything, even on environment and food and stuff like that. I just want to make a quick comment about the cooperative you said. It sounds to me that the way you are organized, and this is something we can discuss together, it sounds that there are the signs of I don't know if you have heard about the socialism. So I haven't really lived in this kind of society before. Believe me, if you will come in a moment, it does not gonna work. So just want to make this comment, and maybe we can discuss later. It's good to hear about this cooperative, this initiative, which is really sustained, it's a good one. But the way it works, you will face in a moment in the future some kind of difficulties.
Yeah, so I think that that's a really interesting comment, but I also think that right now, whether or not we model something that may be parallel to socialism or looking close to socialism, the ways in which we function and every single aspect of how we've run and organized and decided, every decision has been made based on what makes sense and is the healthiest for all of the members involved. And if that looks like anything else, so be it. But we're focused on what is the healthiest and the best decision for every single member of our cooperative first and foremost. And if that looks like socialism, maybe that's just something about socialism. But I do think that it's really important that we do understand that a lot of the roots of this violence is rooted in capitalism. And capitalism and a critique of capitalism cannot be at all a separate conversation from a critique of the violence that happens in fast fashion, because the two are related and dependent upon each other. So I do think that capitalism is not the answer, and I think that capitalism needs to be also abolished. But I do think that the model of the cooperative is based upon the needs that have been discussed together. Everyone's been very transparent, this is what I need. We give rides to people, like we pay for people's Ubers when they need an Uber. We buy lunch for one member every single day because she needs it. And we don't ask questions because we know that we have like the mutual trust again, sort of like a family. And so as we grow and as we change, things might also sort of develop and go as there. But as long as we're rooted in the community that's been there from day one, that's the most important thing to us. Yeah.
How do you personally navigate your own like purchasing power in a capitalistic system, which is inherently problematic? Like, I mean, not to you have like an iPad, like a laptop. You know what I mean? Like, you need to like function in society as well. You know, like.
Yeah. Which is and I totally agree. I think that at the end of the day, we have to decide where our red lines are. So, for example, I will boycott a brand whenever there's an active call, like for example, in the BDS movement. So the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel, if Palestinian civil society is calling for a boycott of a certain product, and there's like an organized, coerced effort around having a very tangible dent in the profit margins of a specific company in order for them to pull out of profiting from an apartheid state, I'll engage in that boycott. Otherwise, I think that the most important thing, again, is sort of a less of like an individualistic idea of like what should I buy and not buy, like because nothing in this world, in the United States at least, has ever been produced in a way that's ethically sound. We live in an active empire. And I think it's really easy to forget that like not only are all of our things completely horrible, we're also on stolen land. And so what does that also mean? How can we reconcile our homes with like the fact that this was stolen? And we're living on an empire and we pay taxes to a government that actually bombed, so I think it's a larger conversation about how can we, as an individual, sure, exist and survive, but also now be part of a larger movement that aims to challenge all of these and like sort of make do with the situation, but also understand that we have now that further responsibility in order to do something about that on a systemic level. Yeah.
First of all, let me just say I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
If you maintain your current trajectory and fire and spirit and passion, I will be a lifelong fan. But outside of fashion, where might Hoda Kotb find inspiration?
It's cute. Good question. I find inspiration in definitely my community, the people around me who are so motivated, like Nishiha, Jemina here, two of my friends. I find inspiration, but also in like the legacies of the movements of which we're trying to like build. So, for example, the autobiography of Assata Shakur, who is a former Black Panther, currently in exile in Cuba, currently had one of the most largest, or number one on the FBI most wanted list. Her story, for me personally, was like incredibly inspirational. I learned a lot about struggle, but also resistance and love. People like Angela Davis, Arundhati Roy, people who typically women of color who have sort of been able to really think about the world in a different way and not only just like speak it, but also like act in like a principled way to like envision and then create that world that they're trying to live in. So that for me has always been something that has been really motivating, is both the people in my immediate circles who are there whenever I'm crying and kind of like can hold me, but also the people whose legacies we're trying to like build and like further and grow. And my mom. Oh yeah, Arundhati Roy is speaking here in Chicago next Monday. I'm going to be in New York with Haymarket. I don't know exactly. At the Chicago Teachers Union. But they're selling tickets, quick, so you better get a ticket. If you just Google Arundhati Roy Chicago Haymarket, it'll come up. No, I hate all of you.
So much of this is about our values, as Muslims. And like when you talk about a few pieces and making them last longer, we have to be comfortable with being seen in the same clothes over and over again, right? And that's hard, even in our own Muslim community. So I don't know, how can we get that message out that it's okay to wear the same clothes year after year?
This is a really funny question. Honestly, I couldn't tell you, given that I usually wear the same thing all the time. And I have a huge Instagram. Like I'm technically a fashion blogger. I used to be. And I still post the same outfit all the time. And I think that it's just not caring. I don't know. It's a difficult question. If anybody else would like to jump in.
Well, I know there's something called in like the fashion world, it's called like a capsule.
Oh yeah.
A capsule wardrobe, and that's like having only like 11 to 12 pieces. Because I move around a lot. I like in my 20s I've averaged a city every 2 years, and so I personally, because I move around so much, don't have a lot of clothes. But it's more of like mixing and matching, so getting a lot of like basics and stuff like that, and having a few statement pieces like my shoes, you can always add in there. And you know, so to change it up, but it's actually not that hard to do. Like people don't notice that I wear the same like clothes because I'll wear it with a different shirt, or like I'll put on like a necklace or something, and it just.
So is that a whole industry of itself, like
Capsule collections.
reinventing what?
Yeah.
Styling,
I mean,
styling basically.
oh,
Styling.
yeah. Styling is like a profession.
No, styling for
Like a capsule.
because what you're describing is like a minimalist lifestyle,
Yeah.
right? Having a few pieces of clothes, but if you want to make them look different, I don't know. It's an uphill battle, but we'll just little by little.
But it's funny because my my family hadn't visited me in like 2 years because I was living out in the Caribbean, and then they came to Chicago and they looked in my closet and they were like, "Is this all you own?" And I was like,
It's funny. The hardest questions for me are the actual fashion-related questions. Oh, were you gonna comment on that?
I was just going to add, well, I have a lot of clothes. I'm not a minimalist at all. But if you were to do that, like buy 10, 12 pieces of like really great quality clothing and you're wearing it and people make comments, and that's an educational moment. You can like teach them about like why you're doing what you're doing. And I'd be proud if like I did that.
I enjoyed your discussion, and I followed your blog on Instagram for, I saw an article, I think, on New York Times about you, or I saw you somewhere, and I started following you. But my question would be, would you take it a step further and say the politics of fashion versus just fast fashion? I'm also a non-minimalist, so I have like season and pre-fall, pre-fall.
You knew.
And
I wasn't making that up.
Then I also have higher end pieces, and I look at the tag, and they're also made in China, made in Bangladesh, and I know probably very likely within the same garment factory, just rebranded with another tag. So
Actually,
is it more the politics of fashion in general versus just fast fashion? People look at fast fashion and say, oh, I don't shop in those places, but their garments are made in the same production line.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. I think fast fashion was just felt catchier. Maybe it was an aesthetic choice, but yeah. I mean, I actually you do bring up a good point in that Prada is made in the same factory as Walmart, and I met the same garment workers. Same people make the same brands for make the same clothes for a lot of different brands. The difference is really in like the ways in which it was produced and like the fabrics that are used. But the garment workers are pretty much all the same, which is also why I think though that fast fashion is a sort of a weird distortion, aberration of fashion. Like I think fast fashion completely destroys the art in fashion, whereas like couture doesn't as much. Like I think that there's still art in couture. Production obviously is questionable, but I think that fast fashion has allowed the sort of normative way of producing clothes that now the rest of the fashion industry is now sort of taking advantage of too. So, yeah, exactly. And this race to the bottom has been made possible by America's military, but also now that those factories exist and those wages are already in place, now maybe Prada can also go in and be like, all right, well then, why would I waste money on an atelier here when I could just produce in Indonesia? And so I do think that fast fashion is a sort of, like, I think fast fashion needs to be abolished. I don't think fashion should be abolished. So that there's like a tiny distinction there, but you are right in that right now the fashion industry has really taken advantage of a very violent situation that fast fashion has sort of created for itself.
A lot of this is like that documentary, The True Cost. I mean, I feel like you made that documentary because everything you talked about is in there, and so I'm sharing it on Facebook.
Yeah, I've heard it's a very good documentary. I haven't seen it, but yeah, I think it's been on my to watch list for a minute. We're still working on a documentary. Thank you. But I think The True Cost also focuses on the environment.
Yeah. It goes through the whole. It starts with fashion, fast fashion. It ends up with capitalism.
Oh, I like that.
All the steps. It goes to Bangladesh. It goes everywhere. And it was life changing.
It was a lot. It had a lot of like the landfill in it, where like so many clothes are like
Not
thrown
the
away.
landfill, it's the countries that are in the landfill.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Sure, our countries. Yeah. Low key. I'm working on a documentary myself right now, too. Released March 2020 from Indonesia.
So where do you see like Bluetin, or what would be your next project? Like where do you see yourself like 5 years from now, as far as your sort of your vision, I would say?
These questions always scare me. Given I have no idea. I used to like make all these like 10-year, 5-year roadmaps, so I realized that life never works that way. So now I'm sort of what's happening tomorrow, for better or for worse. I do think that for Bluetin at least, that needs to be a collective decision. So whatever, it's my own personal opinions are irrelevant, but it matters like what we collectively want the vision of Bluetin to be. And collectively, we have discussed sort of this a more global understanding of how we can shift fast fashion production on a systemic level. So there's a race to the bottom, as we mentioned, in fast fashion, in which factories will constantly close wherever garment workers have unionized and raised wages, and then find somewhere else that's even cheaper, less unionized, even more sort of poor. And then the brands will all follow. That's called the race to the bottom. That's very common in the fashion industry. And so right now, the race to the bottom is actually leading brands to Ethiopia, and across Africa. So from Southeast Asia, our people, I'm just assuming most of us here are from Southeast Asia, have organized so much and for so long that now the wages are so much higher than they used to be. So now all of these factories are closing down across Indonesia, across Bangladesh, and moving to the next poorest area, which is across Africa, particularly in Ethiopia. And so a goal for us, like I guess a dream vision for us would be to be able to reach garment workers before sort of factories reach them, and be able to organize garment workers in a way that allows them to take manufacturing into their own hands. And so brands are forced to work with garment workers rather than series of like investors from Korea who actually own the majority of production, or just like random Korean or Japanese investors in Indonesia. And right now, a lot of Chinese investments are happening across Africa, and so those are kind of also being timed with like this sort of factory production. So that would be obviously like a goal, is to be able to be very proactive about how we see fashion production and where it's moving, and how we can sort of intercept those places. So that's definitely something that's really important to us. Also, obviously, on a consumer level, we want to be able to like have more conversations like this, but also really elevate the conversation in terms of where our clothes are made, but also connect garment worker struggles to everything that's happening across the country right now. So garment workers are like so, mashallah, brilliant and like so intersectional. So when I was meeting with garment worker unions, like one was literally wearing an Angela Davis shirt. There was like a Palestinian flag in the back. They were like quoting Paulo Freire and like all of these like people who like I struggled reading with, and not just like name dropping, but like literally using these frameworks from like all of these revolutions and organizers and struggles globally, like in their own understanding of themselves. And that was beautiful. Like that was so amazing, the way that they were able to articulate everything about like Islamic perspectives on fast fashion, all the way to like what's happening in like Chile right now and like Hong Kong, like everything. And where are we? When was the last time we cited garment workers in every movement that we were a part of, or like we're on the streets like organizing for it? And we saw how connected everything is. So there's no like, we can advocate for garment workers and uplift the voices of garment workers in every single movement that we're a part of, but we choose not to because we don't always understand how to do that. So on a non-Bluetin level, we are working on a campaign, which I cannot release details for, next year, that really is trying to use both sort of a very large, heavy media campaign, but also students and university contracts with brands in order to be able to leverage a major, major brand in order to sign a landmark agreement that has never been signed before. So it's really important for us that like people struggling here are able to understand their own relationships with not just their clothes, but like their existence and an active empire with like garment worker struggles. And that's really important.
This is kind of a follow-up question, but not exactly, because so a lot of small businesses, like my son's friend, he was involved with this. They had a small business that they were working on in Atlanta. They all went to school at Emory, and it's called Ice Cream Walla. They were doing specialty Indian ice cream. I don't know if you've heard of it. My son,
sounds cute.
Gail, is part of that. So But the thing is, they were trying to be very ethical, very green. They're still in existence, but some of the friends had to, branch off because they weren't paying anybody. It was just, more or less like a mom and pop store. But my point is, like, I was telling, his friend, the founder, like, have you gone to the Small Business Administration? Have you, looked to help refugees? Like, what is it you were doing? And he actually was hiring refugees as his workforce, but then, the ice cream freezer failed, and he had to, like, let everybody go because he lost all his product, These kind of things happen, right? Which is, obviously ice cream is a lot different than fast fashion, but you see my point. Like, are you like going for government grants, or you do anything like that?
No government money. I refuse to let the government get anywhere close to this project. No, I don't trust the government. But I do trust progressive grant-making agencies. So this is actually something that I think we're thinking really, really critically about right now, and it's a very difficult part of all of this. So I want to be transparent. It's not easy. This shit's hard. It's hard out here. It's literally a struggle every single day to figure out what does it mean to make sure we have guaranteed work, not only for everybody who right now is a member, but like how can we expand in a way that is not like problematic? Like how can we make sure that we are rooted in our values and can continue to be rooted in our values and not like let anything else change that? And something that I've constantly say is that if we ever fail, the only way I'll allow us to fail is if we're too human for capitalism. The only way. No other reason I will allow Blueton to fail. You have my word. But capitalism sucks. Capitalism sucks. It really does. To give you an example of something that is not an uncommon situation, we have a designer that is like crying to me on the phone because you know how designers are so dramatic, and talking about how like if we don't get our production in time by like February, then like she's gonna die. And it's true. I mean, not that she's going to die, but like it's really important to be able to get the designer their production so they can sell to wholesalers, so they can have their own income, so they can continue to be a designer. And everything was running late because it's a fashion industry. And then the day before, when we were supposed to finish, we had like a good amount of work that day. One of our members gets a call in the morning that her uncle and his 18-year-old son were suddenly killed in bombings in Damascus. What are you supposed to do? Like, and that's something that I don't know. Like, are you supposed to stop and be like, yo, can we just finish this and then talk? Like, no, you can't do that. Like, you literally can't be like, okay, put your life on hold because this product needs to be finished. So we literally just stopped operation. We're like, what do you need? And she's like, I don't know. And so we went for a walk. We got ice cream, so ice cream is not unrelated to fast fashion. And we like talked about it. Other members like shared stories about other family members dying recently, like. And we never finished, and we lost that client. That's going to happen, and we're not going to be able to meet every client. But we need to be able to find clients that are willing to understand that we're going to put humans first and not their timelines. And so it's not all easy, and it is really definitely the hardest thing I ever have and probably will ever do in my life. But I think it's worth it if we're able to see it through. I think it's possible. AIC thinks it's possible, or else they wouldn't be working with us. So take it up with them, honestly.
Well, we think you're a magnificent spearhead for something that I had never heard of. And ideas that
you're just learning what's happening in
right.
the room down the hall. That works too. That's fine. I appreciate it. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
What would you say about a person who says, well, if it weren't for that 7-year-old kid in Bangladesh making his t-shirts or whatever, that kid would not have a job and be able to support his family, right? So kind of referring to the socioeconomic statuses that we go back to, like going all the way back to people that are working on these things. How do we address that, right? I mean, like there's poverty there. There are no jobs, right? Let's say in certain sectors, areas, what have you. What do we do about that?
Well, whoever says that, you can punch them and then curse them out a little bit. But then, after that, after you let them know that they're very wrong, if they want to take it back, take it further. Why is Bangladesh right now in a situation in which there are high poverty rates, in which people have no option but to work in sweatshops? Because of partition, because of India's military, because of America and British economic sort of imperialism dating decades and centuries before. And if we want to actually go back, we shouldn't stop at like where it's convenient. We have to actually look at the root of the issue. And that's, again, why fast fashion is related to militarism and empire. And why I keep saying that we're a part of an active empire is because we here are responsible for why there's economic inequalities in Bangladesh, in Southeast Asia, in India, in Indonesia. It's us. It's so that we can buy a shirt for $5 and that we've been okay and we've learned to only accept shirts for $5. And so I think that if there wasn't a fast fashion factory in Bangladesh, there would be something else. There would be another military, military contract, like maybe they're making weapons. There'll always be an excuse to have, there'll always be a place for like sweatshops to occur. But the same argument was made for like slaves in the United States. Like if they weren't working on the farms, what would they be doing? And I think this is a very problematic conversation because, again, it allows us to only go back until when it's convenient for the argument. But if we're really trying to address roots, if we're really trying to understand why economic inequalities exist so that sweatshops can exist, I think that's a bigger question to ask. And that's somewhere that we can start to organize and like think about on a more like critical level and actually work on addressing. Because we're complicit in all of it, and it's for us, and that's the reason. Because America's us.
Think about Gandhi and the symbolic importance of the spinning wheel. It was part of the fight against British imperialism.
Yeah, no one's perfect. So maybe I won't trash Gandhi now, but yeah, I do think that I think that so many revolutions and like that's happening across the Middle East right now also are so involved in like the labor sector. If we look at Indonesia right now, the people who are leading so much amazing work and community organizing are like garment workers because they understand how interconnected their struggles are. And it's important for us to be able to reciprocate that too. Yes.
This makes me think about just the politics of like choice and what does it mean, you know, like when you have like companies that are now promoting like, you know, modesty, right? Like you have all these like modest, like wear companies and now it's like, oh, like anyone should be able to wear whatever they want. Like that's not a bad message, right? Like we should be promoting this like liberatory, like just freedom of like choice and expression or whatever, but then like that finding a way to like fuel capitalism again and again, and then like just like conversations that I've been having around like, you know, concept like you know, even stemming in like talking about like femininity and like what it means to like, you know, like for someone to be like proud in wearing like makeup, but like why do they need to wear makeup to feel good, and like just like all of these decisions that we're making on an everyday basis that we think are our choices, but really like everything is everything is being fed to us in this like broader system. But I don't know, I just like thought about that. And I wonder if
yes, I do, and I think that it's it's obviously like very complicated ultimately, because I don't want to take away from the fact that like now there are modest options at Forever 21 and H&M, whereas there weren't before, and like that actually is like super helpful for like young Muslim women. But at the same time, I do think that there's a layer of privilege in this conversation at the end of the day that is really hard to be able to like erase. So then that's something that, for example, I remember speaking with garment workers in Indonesia and the union leader and talking about how, you know, I was like, you know, like Muslims are happy for representation, and their jaw was kind of dropped. Like, I'm not going to lie, like the betrayal of their face of like feeling that Muslims in the United States cared more about seeing a Muslim on TV than they cared about their Muslim sisters and exploited in like, I don't know, factories in order to create that clothes. That's also the choice. And I think it's almost a betrayal to a lot of people that I was speaking to in Indonesia. And that's what that choice looked like for them. It was like a one in which you're choosing the comfort of an empire. And I think that it kind of goes back to something that we also talked about a little bit before, about thinking about what our sort of long-term goals are and the demands that we're making now. Are we trying to sort of demand justice in a system that will not see it and is impossible, or are we demanding freedom, and are we demanding an overhaul of that system? So how much stakes do we actually have in the system that we're actually trying to preserve, or are we actually trying to create systemic change in a way that will inconvenience us and take the privilege out of places that we've felt that we've sort of normalized the privilege of? So are we ready to actually know what it would feel like to not be living in an active empire? And I think it's a huge privilege, but I don't think that many of us are ready to actually work on a systemic level in order to take us down, And that's what I think that's sort of a big issue within community organizing spaces, but particularly I think whiteness in community organizing spaces, that there's a limit to how far oftentimes white people are willing to go, because once it actually affects their personal privilege, it gets complicated and it gets difficult because you're so accustomed to that privilege. And we have that too because we live in the United States. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, is the makeup industry just as big of an issue here now? Because it's going crazy.
Brilliant.
And all the same
Everything.
impacts.
This tablecloth. Sorry. These walls. Laptop.
Oh, okay.
Every
People have been exploited.
consumer good. It's capitalism.
I mean, here's the thing, we know that at the end of our lives, fast fashion may still exist, capitalism may still exist, all of that, right? But, there's still some, as Muslims, as, human beings, we are consistently making choices on whether or not we're aiding or, trying to do anything, right? And so at the end of our lives, we want to be able to say we tried, right? Or and so it can feel like the end of, oh, it's so big that we can't do anything. But then, if we all do nothing, then obviously, so just wanted to.
I also want to insert that Nash is working on developing an anti-militarism organization that is starting chapters across the country. So if anyone here is a student at a university or knows students at universities who are interested in anti-militarism work, you should speak to Nash. So I agree with that point. Thank you for your questions. Thank you so much for having me.